This is Jumping In, a roundtable discussion about starting specifications. Our panelists today are Kim Hutchinson, Bridgette Tinsley, and Carrie Gerstenberger. Our moderator is Beth Stroshane. So Kim Hutchinson is with Applied Building Information. She was the third employee at Applied Building Information and had never seen a specification before her first day. She has worked at the company for more than 5 years as an operations assistant and is making the transition to writing specs from her current home in Belgrade, Serbia. Along the way, she earned her LEED AP BD+C designation. She has a strong interest in sustainability and hopes to explore that further. Kim really hates talking about herself in the third person. Our next panelist will be Bridgette Tinsley from Integrus Architecture. A versatile member of project teams, Bridgette brings a sense of excitement and wonder to her work, an eagerness to listen, and adds value and offers insight into design, community, and cultural conversations. Recent projects include the University of Washington Parrington Hall renovation, Peninsula School District's Swift Water Elementary, and currently the STEM building for Pierce College, Puyallup. Bridgette holds a Master of Architecture and Bachelor of Science in Architecture from the University of Michigan, Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. Our third panelist is Carrie Gerstenberger of Bassetti Architects. Carrie is an Associate Technical Specification Writer at Bassetti Architects. Having earned her Construction Documents Technologist, Certified Construction Specifier, and WELL AP certifications, Carrie has developed detailed processes for thorough specification and drawing coordination, as well as educating staff and clients on sustainable material innovations. Her work has helped implement material standards into the firm's guide specs, including research in lowering project carbon footprints and limiting red list materials. Carrie previously sat as a director on the Puget Sound Chapter Board of Directors for CSI and volunteered as a material researcher for Mindful Materials. And today's roundtable will be moderated by Beth Stroshane. Beth is the founder and managing partner of Applied Building Information. She passed the CSI's Construction Documents Technologist exam, is a certified construction specifier, and is LEED Legacy accredited. She is an active volunteer with the Lean Construction Institute and the Construction Specifications Institute. She served as the CSI Puget Sound president from 2014 to 2015 and is currently the Northwest Region Education Chair. Prior to ABI, Beth spent 8 years working as an in-house specifier for 2 large architecture firms in the Seattle area, and began her career working as a construction engineer for a local construction company. Beth earned 2 undergraduate degrees from Milwaukee School of Engineering, a Bachelor's of Science in Architectural Engineering and Bachelor's of Science in Construction Management. All right, so now that all of the introductions out of the way, I'm going to send it off to Beth. And if you guys have any questions, please put them in the chat and I will interrupt to ask those in a few minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Are you still showing a screen or are we just looking at all the people?
We're just looking at the people.
Okay, excellent. So all of the people. Thanks for the intro. I'm always like worried when people do intros because then I feel like I have to like sound really intelligent. Don't always. Anyway, so one of the things we want to talk about here, and part of what is nice about doing an intro like this is you realize that Carrie's education is different than Bridgette's education, is different than mine, is different than almost anybody else who writes specifications. And one of the things we want to talk about here and bring to light is when I went to college for construction management and structural engineering, I didn't even know specs existed. And now I own a firm that writes specs. So people find specifications in lots of different ways, and that's part of what we want to encourage people to look at is what are specifications if you don't know what they are? How do you get into them? Because often it's this weird black hole that you're like, there's an entrance here somewhere, maybe. So that's a lot of what this is about. So want to look at a little bit of expanding intros about how does your current position interact with specifications? Do you write them? Do you interact with them? And then how did you start working with specifications? So my background is I was working for Mortenson, a construction management company, and I was an engineer, and someone gave me a spec, my superintendent, and said, okay, first you have to write a submittal schedule based on this book. And I said, okay. And then I had to break it into pieces and buy that scope from subcontractors. So that was my first introduction to specifications. I wasn't writing them. I was trying to figure out what that thing said and buy it from people. So if we could go through everybody's kind of like first interaction with specifications, and then how do you interact with them in your current role? So let's start with Bridgette.
I knew you weren't going to pick me first, so I wasn't hovering over my unmute button. For me, my first taste of specs, true taste, was I did a CA for that elementary school, construction administration, if we need to dumb it down. I did not know how important they were. I'd always been specs adjacent, you know, when you're drawing things to get it ready for construction documents or what have you. There's always talk of specs, but I don't know anything about it. When you're in CA, it's your Bible. Like I pray to my spec. I often told Julie,
please save me.
yeah. I saved my own copy and like just went to town on it, just wrote it up. There's different colored everything. It's just, you need that spec so much to understand what it is you're looking for. Like, so you broke it up and then bought it from people. I'm making sure what they bought or plan to buy is right. So now on this current project in Pierce, I'm helping build them. I don't do the actual writing, but the team, which we'll get into later, we touch base and go over like, does this look right? Do we need something else? This is what I'm thinking. And that's where we're at this point, kind of like the forming of the thing.
Awesome. Okay, let's go to Carrie.
All right. I was first introduced to specs at NBBJ, and I kept volunteering to be like the spec coordinator liaison, even though I came from an interiors background. So basically, all of the architectural staff, I would gather all the material information and then go and have a conversation with the actual spec writer for the project. And so I got really interested in the details and designing all of my details for specific systems. And so I realized that specs gave me this wild power that I didn't know existed, that I could actually dive into those details with intention. So after doing that for about a year, I said, oh my gosh, this is everything I want to do. And I actually jumped out of design completely and made a 120-degree pivot and became a full-time spec writer, which is what I've been doing for about almost 5 years now. So that's what I do. I write specs full-time for Bassetti, and I am typically on between like 10 and 16 projects, writing project manuals.
Awesome. Okay, next we have Kim.
Hello. So when I started at ABI, I was the third employee and had never seen a spec before. And also Beth, I think, wasn't 100% sure what she wanted either, as far as, you know, what is the new person gonna do exactly. So my very first job was, we're gonna make these edits to the master. So I jumped right into all of the spec sections in the master, and it was absolute gibberish for the most part at the beginning. And just the process of going through and all of the major edits that we made, you know, what is intumescent mastic fireproofing? Look that up. And so just the process of those edits made me at least, you know, get a feel for what is it we're actually doing, and what, you know, what are the first 14 divisions, the super basics. And after that, you know, and I do lots of markups after the client gets hold of them and all of that. And then I was very interested in sustainability. So I studied and got my LEED certification, and I still am interested in learning more in that direction. And like just now I'm working on my first, with massive help from everyone and mostly Beth, like kind of writing my first spec project myself, a really small youth center, just working from our master and plugging it in. So but I'm learning all kinds of new things every day, and interested in going forward from here.
Okay, awesome. So everybody interacts with them differently, and what it means to write specifications varies dramatically. It's more than formatting, if anybody doesn't know that. It's once you figure out how to automate the formatting and deal with that just obscene amount of pain, then the fun stuff starts. Okay, so then we can ask some more questions. Okay, we're going to stay in the same order so that we can keep cycling. So for Bridgette, Julie Taylor speaks very highly of you and your process working with your in-house specification teams. Can you tell us a little bit about your process of how you break down, a whole school? It sounds like you work on a lot. Where do you start? Outside in, top, bottom? I start in the toilet room because I know what's in there. So how do you start a process?
So our project architect pretty much looked at the entirety of the spec and of the schedule and tried to prioritize the things that we know we could get answers on sooner than later. We're also design build, so it's things that they can front load is our sections that we've prioritized. So let's see, one that we did recently was night waterproofing. And so then we all get the schedule, and it says we're going to do these 3 specs this week, and then it'll be these 3 specs the next week, and so on and so forth. And then you have that week to review those sections, and then we get together physically in a room, and we've been using Spec Link. So there's an online form work for this to happen, and we can put our comments on the actual line of the spec that we have a question or have a change for, and we all sit together and ask the question in the room. And so I'll point to something and be like, we want this to be this color. And then someone says, is that true? Is that the color you actually want? Or we want this brick to be this size. Is that true? Is that what you really want? It's been a constant back and forth of like, well, pretty sure for now, so let's go with this. It may have to change later, but what I really like about this process is that each week we sit there and we have a conversation, and people can bring their questions of something that came from last week or something that they see coming up, or even a line in one of the specs that we're reviewing that week that makes us think of something else that we'll review at a later time. I really appreciate the face-to-face conversations. I haven't had that happen so much or as consistently as we do with this group on this project.
Awesome. And yes, there are lots and lots of tools out there. You could die under the information available to everyone, but getting someone to be able to explain the pieces of it and break it down so that you can digest it and that the team can understand is something that we run into a lot with a lot of our teams. So awesome. So breaking it down, just making a schedule, and as it works through and is headed to buyout is how you guys break your current project down.
For the most part.
Okay. And Carrie, how do you attack a specification? Because you're more in the seat of, okay, I can start anywhere I want.
Yeah. So we use a program called eSpecs, and we also utilize PPDs, which is a preliminary project description. So at the very beginning of a project, the project team is responsible for filling out's the wrong word, but editing the PPD, which is generally associated with the preliminary drawings and is issued for an initial pricing process, or I'm skipping the word, but a pricing estimate for 100% SD. And so my process starts at 100% SD. I take that PPD and those drawings, and I review both of them, and then I create a initial outline spec or a 3-part spec, including all of the basis of design materials that were listed in the PPD. And then from there, depending on how many phases there are, or what the project needs, I will help the team focus on sections. Generally, this is completed by doing like an open bracket report, so I can actually generate a document that shows me all of the necessary design selections that still need to be made. And so if there's a few like exterior sections that just have absolutely gobs and gobs of decisions to be made, I communicate with the team, you really need to focus on these 5 sections for this next issuance. So most of my communication is redirection for the team, period. I could go into this. I love process.
And so a little kind of background is an open in eSpecs, or if you use master spec, they have blanks or series of choices in these brackets. And so you can run a report that shows all the open brackets.
Yeah.
If you're doing, if you're using SpecLink, you can tag things like choices that have not been made and run a similar report. So really that is, okay, where have we not figured out what's going on yet in a, 600 to 1,000 page PDF is what it ends up being, but you have to be able to find this stuff. It's like the Easter egg hunt from hell. Okay, so thanks, Carrie. Next, for Kim, coming cold to the industry, how did you learn what you needed in order to coordinate specifications for your position?
Well, again, starting from the master, it was kind of a process and still continues to be in like maybe 6-month to 1-year increments, like first getting in there and figuring out just what is the terminology, what goes where. But then we've added more and more. And like, for example, big edits where I've been linking all the different sections together helps me figure out what applies. Okay, that also refers back to, a wood section, figuring out what links together. And then we're also putting together, where is all of the fireproofing, where is all of the, where we can turn that on and off with one click, and locating those, just figuring out where they are and how they interact with each other is probably how I've learned 90% of the things I've learned over the last years, just how the specs interact. And then obviously I see what happens when I edit them, but that's probably the biggest learning, just getting in there and seeing what goes where and what attaches to what else.
Yes, and both software, eSpecs and SpecLink, have ways to link. eSpecs has a link with the assembly code for within Revit models is how you can make stuff link together. And BSD you can do links between the sections. And so it's just figuring out how do you be more efficient and move through the process. So everybody knows that if you don't have bathtubs, you shouldn't have bathtub sealant. But remembering to go to the sealant section and taking out the bathtub sealant, that's the hard part. And so it's getting that, if it's in interiors, you don't have exterior paint, but remembering to turn off all the exterior paint, that can be the hard part. And so that's where exploring how to make yourself more efficient is something that helps you move forward. Okay. Melissa, do we have any questions from the general audience?
I haven't received any yet.
Okay.
But if anybody would like to send them, put them in the chat. When we get to the next lull in the conversation, we can start to ask those.
Okay, perfect. Okay, for Carrie, how much experience did you have coordinating or writing specifications before you became a full-time spec writer?
Great question, Beth. My interactions with specs prior, that's a hard question to ask because I don't know how to quantify it. I probably had 1 year of initial design and spec coordination before I decided I wanted to be a full-time spec writer. So I think the biggest challenges for stepping into a spec writer was stepping in to make that decision to leave design behind completely, honestly. That was a really gruesome decision that I just couldn't. I really wanted to do it, but I was so nervous what it would mean for my design future. But once I did it, it was kind of like a fish to water. I love reading. My background, my first degree was in anthropology. So I'm a huge researcher and reader, and specs just make sense. They're so logical. And there's a black and white answer, and I love that. And so it was a really easy role to step into. And I like how direct they are.
Yes,
Yeah.
I like that too.
Yeah.
One of the things that people ask is what draws you to this profession?
Mhm.
And one of my answers is that I get to learn and teach every day.
Oh my gosh. I totally agree.
And I started doing this in 2005 when I figured out that the profession that I went to school for many years to get to was not a good fit with my personality. And so I had to figure out what else I was going to do when I grew up. And so, and every day I am still learning and teaching every single day, and do not know everything that there is to know now, or will I ever in the future. So that is something that's exciting to me. So if that's something that's exciting to you, this may be a really good profession for you. Okay. Oh, here's an excellent one. So when you receive a new project, how do you approach starting specifications to not get overwhelmed? We're going to start with Kim. Since she started her first job, how did she not project? First, she has to unmute and then tell us, how do you not get overwhelmed?
Well, honestly, with this first project, I'm not sure I can 100% claim to not have been overwhelmed, but the kind of methodical process of taking the TOC that I was given and, looking at the sections and matching them up with what's in the drawings, which again, that's very new to me, the drawings. So that's kind of a long process, but I'm getting the hang of it. And then I just, not a natural skill for me, but just the amount of notes that I'm taking, as I notice anything on the way through. And that's kind of where I am right now. I can't say I have any great answers there just because of my first one, but I didn't lose anything. I got through it. I got it turned in. So
Exactly. Keep breathing and don't panic.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That's where I am right now.
Excellent. Okay. How about you, Bridgette?
For me, actually, when I realized I was doing this panel, I started to think about like chicken and the egg, because as one of the people creating the drawings, I often think like, do I talk? Julie is our specs writer, so instead of like the specs team, I'm like, do I talk to Julie now? Is there something for me to start with? Do I crib from another project? I don't know what to do right now. But Julie, being as good as she is, half the time there's something that she's already got structured out, and you can start there. And that helps me a lot, that I can at least look at what another project used. Like if I'm looking at, I don't know, toilet compartments, this is what another team used. At least gives me a leg of products to start looking at that point. So I'm not quite as crippled with I don't even know where to start. So have a great team. That's the first thing you should do.
You should work with Julie.
Mm-hmm.
And
I get to cheat.
and Julie is not on this panel because Julie does not like to talk, and we are not going to make Julie talk. But Julie started writing specifications since I've started writing specifications, and Julie's background was a school teacher. So there's lots of places that spec writers come from. Great spec writers come from. And not surprising, the school teacher is really good at schools. She knows all kinds of stuff about schools. Okay, Carrie, how about you? How do you keep from getting overwhelmed?
Really fast. That's really interesting. She also has a teaching background, because when I graduated with my first degree, I was like, I don't know what I do. And so I actually was a middle school teacher for 3 years. And then I went back to school for massage therapy. And then I went back to school for interior architecture and got my second degree. But teaching, there's such spec writers. I always had this idea that spec writers are just like crabby older people who just like don't talk to anybody, just sit on a keyboard all day, and that's totally not how the future is looking, at least. And so there's just so much interaction and communication and constant learning and teaching that happens that I love it. It's what I'm supposed to do. But to answer the question, the actual question, I have really dedicated processes in line that I am constantly reminding all of our staff what the expectations are. And so I think half of not getting overwhelmed is making sure your teams know what the expectations are for communicating with you, when to communicate. I am also responsible for coordinating keynotes for every project. So generally I start with the PPD and I remove all unneeded information from the 3-part spec, and then only issue keynotes associated with things from the PPD. So if they need a metal wall panel type 2, it means they have to come to me with with a keynote request. And I say, do you mark that up in the specs? And they say no. And I say, well, can you please mark it up in the specs? And then I issue the keynote. So for us, part of not getting overwhelmed really has to do with informing the team on expectations and keynote coordination.
Okay, and keynotes are the words that show up on the drawings.
Thank you. Yes.
Sometimes it's just text,
Yeah.
and we have to flip through all the drawings and look for any words to see if, we have a match for that. Or if you're using keynotes, which Revit can do, AutoCAD can do, then Carrie gets a list that comes out of, a text thing that says, oh, look, everything's in here. They're like, you have thatched roof? Oh, no. Okay, we'll take that. So that's a coordination tool that can be used. And one of the things that I think about in writing specs, it's kind of like standing on the sidewalk in downtown Seattle and looking up at a skyscraper and thinking, how do you climb a skyscraper? We climb skyscrapers all day long. And you know how you climb them? You find the exit door in the back and they're there. Rise and run every single step all the way to the top in consistent landings. So that's how specifications are written. They're all floors, the steps are all the same, and they're all laid out the same. So if you can find the exit door in the back, there's a stair that goes clear to the top. So awesome. Next question is related to design and specification philosophy and how your background in design helps or hinders your ability to develop specifications. Let's start, Bridgette.
I would say my education background helped not at all towards my relationship with specs. I don't even know if they were mentioned, which is, I'm sorry, University of Michigan, to just frown upon you here. My education throughout construction administration taught me that I need to have it in hand as I'm drawing the details in the earlier design phases. Like now, I don't want to be the person who didn't look at this door system or whatever this product is and then have them trip over it in construction administration. I'm not going to be the one who says they'll figure it out in CA. I want it to be tight on the front end as best as I can. So that's what really pushes me to talk to our specs writer as much as I do to harass her, which she appreciates the question. So I'm glad of that. But mostly to make sure it's well coordinated. Like I didn't even realize there was in-house coordination that was potentially getting missed on its way to the field. And I want to stop that gap as best as possible.
Awesome. Okay, how about you, Carrie? How does design specification philosophy schooling help, hurt?
I totally agree with Bridgette. Like specs didn't exist in school. I didn't have any idea what they were. And in fact, my first job as a designer, there was like this guy who walked around the office that people would like tell me if you have a question, go like interrupt him on the way to get coffee or something, because he costs a lot and we don't want to charge the project. So I didn't really know who he was or what he did, but I knew he had a lot of information. And so that was kind of like my first introduction to specs, was like this mythical creature who just like
Accost that man on the way to get his coffee.
yeah, pretty much. So I learned about specs and like informing my design by asking the right questions, but I've been a spec writer for far longer than I ever was a designer. So I, from the spec side, always am reaching out to my project teams and saying, yeah, but do you need a pass door in that folding, panel partition? Like, do you have it listed on your door schedule? So I'm typically looking at the specs and saying, you haven't addressed this. Can you please look at this section?
Yes. Do you have it?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Oh, here we go. What challenges do you still face regarding specifications, and how do you overcome them? Or one challenge that you figured out how to overcome? Ooh, Carrie knows and Bridgette's still thinking, so we'll go with Carrie.
I have one. The painting and coding section is always a challenge that everybody previously is kind of like this 32-page Word document or document that you kind of didn't know where to start, and so I developed this great system. I love this system that I've basically in part 3 of the spec, I've created what I call recipes. So every type of substrate has a different recipe, and it's associated with an MPI number, which is basically a Master Painters Institute. They assign types of paint a number, and that's how they organize it. So I rewrote that entire painting and coding section so that every substrate has a recipe. And then I created this Excel document that lists all of the substrates listed in the painting section. And so every single issuance, I sit my team down for 3 to 5 minutes and I say, are you painting this substrate? Yes or no? Are you painting this substrate? Yes or no? And so I take that matrix, and then I can really quickly and easily update the painting and coding section accurately, because as soon as the painting subs see something wrong in that section, they sometimes go AWOL. And so it's really important that it's clean and direct and accurate. So
Okay. Excellent. That is Carrie's game of who is your daddy and what does he do from Kindergarten Cop.
yeah.
What is your substrate and what does this paint?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Did you come up with something, Bridget?
Yes, I would say mine's a little from the side, more from the architectural side. Things I struggle with is more like the Division 1 game, like when am I owed things, or when do I owe people things, and more the contractual side of specs that I need just to read it closer. I need further development there. It's definitely the architect I was working under during my CA job has that game on lock, and I just gotta figure out, maybe have a couple more conversations with him as to how he really understands when to expect what from the contractor, from the client, etc.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've done in teaching about CA is or teaching about Division 1 is you take Division 1 and you make a box that is semi-transparent in some piece of software, and you paste over and you make different colors for the architect, the owner, and the contractor. And you paste that semi-transparent box in the color of the person responsible for doing that action. And then you can start to understand, it's like, okay, so who is supposed to do what and give what to who? And so just being able to see it flow through, and then all of a sudden you can see in your combined PDF, oh, here's all the stuff that I owe to people, and here's all the stuff that people owe to me. So that might be a way to do that. And also in the comment of that semi-transparent box, you can say, what is the response time? So then you can start to think, okay, so how does this go? And wait a second, if they've only got 3 days in their schedule and we're supposed to turn in submittals and they're supposed to answer questions, maybe we should ask about that. I mean, so that's a way, that's one of the things that I've done, trying to make Division 1 more accessible. So that may be helpful to you.
That makes sense, especially with the response times added to it, because one of the big things is knowing when I need to be pushing people for things. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yes, and being able to say in this section, in this paragraph, it says that I have 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
So, and one of the things when I was first in construction, I would tell people that they only get 10% that's urgent. So don't spend it all in one place.
Nice.
They're like, is this really urgent? The toilet accessories before the structure? They're like, okay, fine, stop. Okay, excellent. Okay, Kim, do you have ideas in that same category of things that you've learned that have helped you move forward?
I mean, for me, and it's still a work in progress, it is just all about schedule management with how often it changes and how overly optimistic I tend to be about, oh, everything's just going to happen on time and it's going to take me exactly 10 hours to do this thing that should take 10 hours. So staying like extremely on top of that and making sure to put in, every note on what changes is super important for me and really makes me less frustrated. When I don't do it, I say a lot of terrible things about past me. So I'm really trying to hit that, every time.
Yes. One of the things that stuck with me working with the Lean Construction Institute is only promise 50%. If you're going to spend half of your day, promise people stuff based on half of your day, and then see how well that is. Do you actually get half your day? Or do you only get 30% of your day? Or do you actually get 80% of your day? So just being aware of how much you promise people helps, helps me fail less. Okay. Oh, here we go. Do you have any advice to others who aren't confident in specifications or are thinking about it or are afraid to start? Carrie.
Yeah. If you are not confident, it kind of depends on what stage you're in. If you're an architect trying to gain more confidence in specs, I think the easiest thing is to pick 2 or 3 sections that relate to material you're working in and just sit down and read through it top to bottom. Exposure, I think, is one of the easiest ways to get acquainted with them. And then if you're thinking of being a specifier, I really encourage, something that made a big difference for me was taking the CDT and the CCS exams early on, because it helped me not develop bad habits in spec writing, because there is just a wide variety of people who write specs out there. And so it really helps. Those 2 tests teach you all of the fundamentals plus more. And so you become such an asset to your teams, and you're not just learning on the job, you understand what's happening holistically. So taking those 2 tests or exams early on, certifications early on, is really just game changer for me.
Okay, awesome. How about you, Bridgette?
I agree with Carrie on the exposure technique. Like, that goes a long way. I'd also say for our Bluebeam users, the search function, lifesaver. Go ahead. Like, it's not as hard as you think it is to find what you're looking for. The search function will take you 90% of the way, and then you just have to filter through those results. Of course, there's things that are kind of tucked away and here and there, and that happens. But as your first step, that will help you a lot.
Mm-hmm. And just breaking it down by section. don't let anybody fool you. Nobody reads a spec from beginning to end. They just don't. That's like sitting down and reading a dictionary. Nobody does that. Not even spec writers have the tolerance for that. And so next I want to ask Kim and then follow up with something that helps make specs more accessible. What do you think, Kim?
Okay, so as far as what I think would be helpful, I can say for somebody coming not from an architecture background, working with drawings, trying to match things up with the drawings, I should have probably started doing that 2 years earlier than I did, because it put a lot more things together for me in a way that I wasn't able to visualize. And again, that might be kind of an unusual way to get here, but if you're, if somebody's starting from a completely different career like I was, I think I would have been to my benefit to do that quite a bit earlier.
One of the things we talk about is it's like scope fish, essentially coordinated specifications and drawings. Means that if there's a blue fish in the specs, there's a blue fish on the drawings. And so finding scope and coordinating between specs and drawings is like playing Go Fish with a 3-year-old, right? Play the cards face up. If the 3-year-old's got all the matches, then everybody wins. So that's one way to do coordination. The other way, the other thing that helps make specifications more accessible to people is realizing that section by section, they're like a recipe for a system. So if you've ever cooked anything and you look at a recipe and you're looking at a whole cookbook and it just seems overwhelming, if you look at one recipe, part 1 is what you're making, okay? How many does it serve? Is it spaghetti or lasagna? Okay, and then part 2 is what you shop for at the store that you need to make sure you have. And part 3 is how you put it together. Specs are exactly the same way. Part 1 is general, part 2 is products, and part 3 is execution. So if you find the right fish and you make sure that part 1, part 2, and part 3 make sense for your job, you're halfway there. And start with stuff that's easy to understand. I mean, everybody thinks, oh, I don't know anything about curtain wall, I'm going to start there. No, start with the toilet accessories. You know what a toilet paper holder is, right? And so you're like, oh, this section's long and gross. What do I have in here? Oh, there's a partition mounted toilet paper holder. Do I have those? Oh, yeah, I do. Oh, okay. So what else do I have? Go into the bathroom. What is in the toilet room in my office? Oh, it's that thing right there. Oh, it's that thing right there. Oh, I don't have any sanitary napkin disposal because I'm a man. What is that? Is that in every women's room? Okay, go find a woman and ask her. So it's just like, those are the things that you gotta make sure. I've had more than one architect tell me, we don't need those. I'm like, what? So anyway, it's walking through a building and seeing what you can find, right? Look at the toilet accessories in a bathroom you go in. Look at the fire extinguisher cabinet. Is it surface mounted or is it recess mounted? Why would you use one or the other? Oh, those are in a garage. Oh, that keeps you from whacking your shoulder on it in your apartment building. I mean, so just working through a building and looking at a spec, one system at a time, and figuring out how that makes sense is really how you get them to be more accessible. And it's just exposure, one at a time, just read one this week and read one more next week. And, in about 6 months, open the curtain wall one. And yes, the curtain wall still makes people's head explode, even people that have been doing this a long time. And paint is nasty. So is casework. Go find a friend. I mean, so there's sections that are, easy to work with. And then there's sections that, like, you're walking into aisle 12 of the hardware store and you're like, what is a lock washer? Do I need those? So, Google's also your friend. So figuring out what things are they in your project, is how we get, specification more accessible. Okay, Melissa, do we have any other questions from the audience so far?
We have not received any questions from the audience. So if anybody wants to ask them live right now, and that also goes for the panelists, if there's anything you want to ask the other one while we have the chance, say go for that.
Or you can ask anyone here.
That's true.
I've been writing specs for a long time. Melissa's been writing specs for a long time. She came and talked to me before she wrote.
That's true.
So did Julie.
Yeah. I also went and talked to Julie when I was thinking of specifying full-time. So, yeah, I think that's actually a really good thing to talk about as well, is just the amount of help you get from other industry professionals. Is a very collaborative industry, and the amount of help I've gotten from people who are essentially rivals. I mean, I remember Julie was competing against another friend of ours, Kelly, for the same project that was a competition. And they sat down, they're like, this doesn't make any sense. What are you doing here? What should we do here? Like, let's make sure that we both understand this, so we both have a chance at it. And so it's helping each other is going to get everybody further than not helping. And I think that really speaks a lot to the amount of mentorships that you see here. Like, I've been mentored by Beth, I've been mentored by Julie, I've been mentored by John Jeffcott and Ann Whitaker and Mark Chavez, just so many different people. And I think it's the same for a lot of people in this industry.
Yes, there's
Yeah.
not enough of us, so we're all learning from everybody.
Yeah, it's a really small community once you start spec writing. Like, it's a really small community.
And if anybody finds anybody who's spec curious, let us know. And
Please. See you, Beth. I'm also looking.
Does everybody. So
Yeah.
anyway, but the goal is figuring out how do we train more of us, and how do we train people faster? So that right there is the challenge of our industry right now, our profession. I, got dropped into writing specs because I was half the age of anybody else they had and was interested. They're like, here's a CT room that you can spec. Anyway, so I survived. But there's figuring out, if my firm is looking for new spec writers, Carrie's firm is looking for new spec writers, every other firm is looking for new spec writers. How do we make more? So if anybody has ideas on where they come from, how do we make more? How do we train them more efficiently? We're all trying to solve that problem. So if anybody's curious, reach out.
And then also it's important to note that you can teach skills, and specification writing is a skill. You cannot teach aptitude. You can't teach attention to detail. You can't teach attitude, but you can teach anybody how to do a skill. And specifications is no different. Start small, baby steps as you go up.
But it's do you want to learn and teach every day, or you want to, master it in the next 12 hours so that you can be an expert? If you want to master it in the next 12 hours to be an expert, this is not the profession for you. But if you want to learn and teach every day until you retire and plant flowers, then this is a good profession for you. If you want to see how, if you get 1,000-piece puzzle and you want to see how they all go together, right? Or you take the toaster apart to see what makes it pop up, right? What is that blue button hooked to? This is a good profession. And, everybody's like, maybe I don't want to write specs because I will get pigeonholed into writing specs my whole life. Like, well, the only time you ever get pigeonholed into writing specs is when the alternative is being laid off. You're like, not a bad pigeonhole to be stuck in. So just even if you don't want to do it your whole life, learning how to do it may, keep you employed when you want to be employed. So you don't have to tell everybody, like I don't tell everybody that I can, fix plumbing. I just tell a couple people that I can fix plumbing.
Well, now you've told all of YouTube as well.
Yeah, but I will not fix all of YouTube's plumbing. Carrie. Do you have anything you want to leave people with? We have 5 more minutes. If you're
I think-
leaving people with one thing, what would it be?
I think it's really important. So thinking about specs in general, that what's written in the specs doesn't always mean that's the reality on site. And so specs should kind of be taken with a grain of salt sometimes, and that there should also always, if your firm, let me finish that sentence, there should always be a feedback loop from CA to your specifiers. So if your firm has a specifier in-house and something's not working in CA because of the way your master is written, you need to tell your specifier. And that's, I've started just recently, actually. I do all these like preset meetings, like a kickoff meeting, and then a CA transition meeting. But I just added a new one that basically gives CA teams an opportunity to like directly sit down with me and say, this totally didn't work on site. And so I update our masters based on that. So what's written in
I
the
got
specs?
6 RFIs
Yeah.
related to this thing right here.
Yeah,
Let's fix that.
we need to modify it.
Yes. Yes.
So it's constantly changing. Specs aren't static. That's fake news. Shouldn't say that. Sorry. That's just not how specs are. So constantly changing, growing.
Awesome. Okay, Bridgette, if you're leaving the audience with one thing about specs, what would it be?
They're very important. I mean, honestly, like if you're in your second year of interning as an architectural designer, you don't really know unless you were thrown, unless you're working on the contractor side, you're not going to know how important the specs are. So I would say if you're young, honestly, open them. Whatever you're working on that day, look at a section that has to do with whatever you're working on that day. And it'll just give you a taste of how much is in there. Like I knew it was important, but actually reading them and spending time with it will teach you how important it is. I also think it's interesting. You're interested in training specifiers faster. I don't know how that can be done. Because I mean, like Carrie had said, I think it is really a lot about exposure, and how else do you get it than to just strap yourself to one for a while? I don't know, but it's something I will continue to noodle on and will pass on through Julie if I have any good ideas.
Well, when you write specs full time, you're strapped in. So it's just how fast is the exposure,
Mm-hmm.
and are you doing, one room or 1-story buildings like we started Kim out on, or the complexity that's in a hospital and the complexity that's in a youth shelter is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's figuring out how do we
I
get
kind of
that
like
experience and exposure.
I like the Spartan kick, but more things go wrong with the Spartan kick.
Okay, awesome. Kim, what would you leave people with?
Well, I feel like it's been said quite a bit, but there is not a day in the last 5 years that I haven't learned something new at my job. And I love that. It's, never a dull moment. I mean, there are some parts of some days that might not be exciting, but there's always something new to learn.
Awesome. And I guess if I left people with anything, if this sounds interesting, go talk to somebody about what they do every day. Because if you're in a profession or even in an industry that is right for you, but you're not quite a right fit where you're at right now, and this sounds like it might fit, explore it. It's worth seeing. And it is, if it's a good fit, it's a lot of fun. And if it's what you're meant to do, start doing it soon. Okay, I want to hand it to Melissa. If you got to tell anybody anything, what would it be?
Oh no, now I'm put on the spot. I would say you need to understand that, or you have to be comfortable with the unknown. Right? You're not going to know everything right away. You're not going to, I've been doing this for, God, how many years now? 13-ish years. in or out of specs, and then specifying full-time for maybe a decade or so. And there's still things that I don't know, that I don't understand, that I have to ask questions about. I mean, exactly what they're saying. This is a huge learning process. And there's so much to know that it's really helpful to talk to the experts. We have a lot of really amazing local reps who, if I don't know something, I can call up and I know that they will tell me the truth, whether it's good for their product or not. I know that I can call up specifiers at other firms and they will tell me exactly what's happening, what kind of failures they've had. And even if it's a, hey, don't tell anybody else, but incorporate this kind of thing. That's always been really helpful. And just understand that you can only do your best. And don't beat yourself up because you're not 10 years down the line when you're still starting. I would say just like have kindness for yourself, have kindness for the industry, and make a lot of friends. Because to be perfectly honest, I have a lot of very, very close friends who I met through this industry and are now just wonderful people in my life. And it's gone well beyond the kind of a colleague relationship, and that we're fantastic friends. And that's really what this industry offers. And you can see from Carrie and Bridgette and Kim that being involved with specifications, you can be involved with it from so many different methods and ways and levels. You know, you can still be involved with it and work with it full time. You can still be involved with it and work with it part time and use that to influence your design. So it's just a really great tool that's very helpful to learn about. So that was probably a little long, but that's what I would leave somebody with, wanting to let them know.
Sounds excellent. Is there anything else? And we're at 101. So if anybody needs to bail, it has been awesome spending time with you. Is there anything that anyone in the audience wants to leave people with? Spec related, what they learned today, or had a quick question?
We're friendly people. Feel free to ask. All right. So in that case, if you guys do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email us. Thank you so much, Carrie, Bridgette, Kim, and Beth today for speaking with us. And this is really helpful and interesting. And every time I hear people talk about their passions like this, it reminds me why I'm so excited about this industry as well. And it's so easy to get lost in the day-to-day, and hearing people talk about these things makes me want to go back to work and just do an amazing job. So thank you all. It's very inspirational. For everybody else, I'll send out a survey. Please put in your AIA numbers or a certificate if you would like either of those. The amazing Julie Taylor will be coordinating those, and we'll get those out to you as soon as we can. So thank you again, and we appreciate it.
Thanks all.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
Melissa.
All right, thank you. Take care.
Well done.
Thanks, Susan.
Go Division 9.
If you need help with the paint section, talk to Susan.
Yeah.